Friday night is the Rangers Journal night.
Good evening and welcome to your Rangers Journal for Tuesday night. Tonight we're going to do something a little bit different, so we aren't going to focus on the pitch for once. We are going to take a look at the current situation with the board. As Doug pointed out before we went live, there maybe isn't too much movement there to talk about, but we will give it a shot and try and keep you up to speed with where the club is. Just before we get into this, I'd just like to give a shout out to Premier VPN. We provide simple, safe and reliable VPN solutions. You can find them on Google searching Premier VPN or also on Twitter searching the same thing. With me tonight, I've got Kev. How you doing, mate?
Not too bad, Dave. Not too bad. Feeling tired this morning. Well, all the way through the day, but feeling good now, and hopefully this gives me a wee burst of energy.
I don't know, mate. We're talking about the board. Probably not. Doug, how's yourself, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. Glad to be on, talking about the Rangers as always.
Right, and last but certainly not least, Ross, how's it going?
It's all right. It's all right, Dave. I think we always talk about how much we dislike the international breaks, but when it's Rangers, I think sometimes we need a break from all the nonsense that seems to get put out. So I think sometimes it's good. And besides, we're in the November international break and we've not sacked the manager, so you can count that as progress. You can count that as progress.
Numbers. That's some kind of record.
As well for us for the last wee while, yes. But like I say, we've been talking about finances. Maybe that's a reason why.
well, there is that. Okay, so let's launch into this then. I guess the keynotes from that particular set of financials. Pre-tax loss was up to 17.3 million. Operating expenses were 110 million. Revenue was up 5% to 88.3 million. Wages reduced by 4%, and that equates to 3 million. Pre-player trading, we were down to a 2 million loss. However, that jumped to 17 after player trading. I think one of the things that strikes me with both the set of financial results and also the interview that we got, Kev, was I think it's fair to say that the majority of money that we're going to spend on players is either going to be generated directly from the directors and soft loans or through player trading. I just want to start here. Does that worry you to an extent?
I suppose based on right now, yes, it does worry me, because I think when you're looking at some of our assets or potential assets, I just don't know if I can foresee us getting any big sales right now. Mm-hmm. I think it would be less of a worry. I think if you compare it to Celtic, where they probably are also not so much reliant on it, but that's where they make their spending from. I think their net spend ended up actually being in the positive in the summer there. So I think if we can get the player model or the player trading model right, should I say, then I would be less worried about it. I think probably just so far from what we've seen does create a bit of anxiety with the way that we're playing. But I think if you look at the likes of maybe Jeff Day, if Diamonde can hit form again that he was sort of showing last year, the likes of Raskin, who's coming onto a game, Barron's playing well, I think maybe the anxiety will calm a wee bit. You never know, we might get to January and some teams might show a keen interest in some of these players. But I think where the anxiety comes is where our biggest outlays have actually went, when you look at the likes of Dessers, who are more than likely going to take a loss. You look at Danilo, which, listen, that might change. You might get a run of games and start to produce. But from the evidence we've got right now, that's a huge outlay where we probably can't see the potential profit being made on there. So I think right now, feeling a bit anxious. I think there is potential for it to get good if we make the right decisions in the market. In terms of January, I don't know. I suppose it really depends on where we are with the manager come January time, whether there'll be any investment at all in terms of going out to sign players, or is it going to need to be the sake of one has to go out for one to come in? Because that seemed to be the way it was sort of looking towards the end of the summer window. So I can't really see there being a difference with that come January. And we don't have, like you said, on the financial reports, we've not got the money in the bank there to have the luxury to go and spend without a player going out. So, yeah, bit of anxiety at the moment, especially with the way things are going so far this season.
No, agreed, mate. Agreed. And I think you're spot on as well. I think we will be in exactly the same boat where we will need someone to leave. I think there's a couple of elements to that. There's obviously someone needs to leave for a fee, so we've actually got a fee to spend on a new player. I think the other part of it, though, I touched on it there, Doug. We reduced wages by 3 million. The vast majority of that is going to be the guys that were out of contract, so your Lundströms, your Barisics, etc. We've obviously made a further dent in that through the summer window. We shifted on Todd Cantwell, Goldson. They're going to be on fairly decent money. Do you think, let alone the fee that we can spend for a player, do you think, from what you've heard, that, because I guess my thought is that we're probably a bit restricted who we can buy as well. I think wages is going to be a fairly significant factor in that. What's your kind of thoughts on the profile of player that we can sign with those wages?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll aim to continue to look to buy the types of players that we were looking at in the window that's just passed. Early 20s with a ceiling, with a high ceiling. Trying to get those players that are like Igmani, who something that I mentioned before that the managers actually said recently, getting players at that point just before they kind of hit the headlines and become a player that's going to go for 5-6 million. We want to try and get those type of players at that kind of 1-2 million kind of point. Because if there's a lot of good players that all it takes is one good season and one good run for them to suddenly become a fancied player. You see it all the time after, like at the elite level. One of the best examples, I think, is what was the boy's name? Was it Rodriguez? Was it that signed for Real Madrid? He had one phenomenal tournament with his country, scored an absolute worldie, he went for an absolute fortune, and then he was just kind of okay, as he had been in his career up to that point. Yeah, and I think sometimes there's players that we can get before they have like that moment or before they hit that kind of point where they're getting noticed more. I think players like Yilmaz and Raskin were kind of approaching that kind of point when we got them. They were fancied players that had a bit of buzz about them. But and particularly in Yilmaz's case, we did kind of pay that slightly higher price to get them. So if we can get in there at that kind of maybe more of an Egoman level, as I say, hopefully that fits in with that, more that player trade mod. Because as you pointed out, a big drop of that was due to our lack of training in players, and I like to think everyone was expecting there was going to be a big hole there because we were obviously letting go of a big chunk of players who were high value or who could have been high value, and we're letting them go for free. So we kind of have to take that hit, I think, and just sort of push on. We've got some assets now, I think, so I think we should look to try and push the trading aspect. I do think there's some positives on the horizon. So, the fact that we have absolutely no board of any kind, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, once these people start coming in, they can start working on improving things and driving improvements to make more money. We're obviously going to be potentially signing we will be signing a new kit deal next year, be it with Castor again or someone else. So there's a potential to make a better deal there, because we're further on than we were when we signed the Castor deal. I think we're in a better place. We can make more money, be it with Castor or someone else. So there are areas to make more money. You talked about the 5% increase in revenue. I believe the Swiss Ramble said that was something like a 66-70% increase over the past 5 years. That's a phenomenal improvement if you think about it. And if we can keep kind of pushing that, making more money in these areas, things like the Edmiston House and things like that as well. All that can obviously go towards the player trading and hopefully give us that little bit extra to maybe do that little bit extra.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point you touch on there, Doug. The revenue, yes, it's a fairly significant increase, even season on season. When you compare that over the last kind of 5-10 years, it's absolutely huge. One of the things that obviously does stand out for us is that operating expenses of 110 million and revenues down at 88.3. Do you think, and I get you're probably not a finance advisor like our friends on the east side of the city, but do you think that there's much more scope in the revenue area to increase that? Because obviously, in an ideal world, you'd actually want revenue a bit higher so it can top up the transfer kitty.
I think there's a ceiling for the amount of revenue we can make based solely on where we are as a football club. And what I mean by that is where we are in the football pyramid. Mm-hmm. It's not a secret. We are obviously a big club, but we're limited by our domestic sponsorship deals. We can make more, but that needs to come from exposure to the Champions League. And it needs to come from, other areas that we can't really access at the moment. Doug's mentioned that talking about kit deals and things. We've signed a new deal with the Kindred Group, who do the obviously the Unibet, the 32 Red. It's apparently the best sponsorship deal we've ever had. That's good. I understand people have got their issues with gambling sponsors and things, and that's totally fair. But I suppose at that point it's about making money. Rangers, the support. I think the club have been we're obviously very reliant on what the support put in. There's we buy kits, we buy season tickets, we buy merch, we buy pies, we buy absolutely everything. You have guys who put my gels. They have guys who put their absolute life into Rangers, and I think that's probably where there's been a little bit of the frustration. In terms of things, obviously, is where you've got guys that they put their heart and soul into it, and they're not really getting anything out of it. In terms of obviously we're talking about where we can make revenue, we can, but we need to start making the right decisions at a boardroom level that will then breed these kind of things, these things to be able to get. Obviously, if you make good decisions financially in terms of player trading, you get more success on the park. If you get more success on the park, you then get access to the Champions League, which it then becomes a snowball effect. We started it, 2 seasons ago when we got the access to the Champions League, and we with 2 record sales within 6 months in Patterson and Calvin Bassey. And sorry to point on something else that Doug said, sell guys, our player trading has been abysmal. We sold Calvin Bassey for £20 million based on essentially a good 6 weeks. It was, I know he had good spells, but based on that at the end of that season and the Europa League final, that exposure matters to scouting teams. And I just don't think we've done enough of that. We were talking about how the amount of guys that we've let go. You let go. Golson left. You said Roof, Barisic, Lundstrom, all these guys. That's probably not a kick in the backside of 200 grand a week in wages that we've let go. And what were we at that point? What were we getting for it? We don't nearly get enough for the amount of money that's invested into the club as a whole. I know overall we've had to make other decisions. Edmiston House, I think it will pay for itself. We've had to invest in other areas like the disabled section, which was by far, in a way, an incredibly important thing that had to be done. Whether I know people have had debates about the state and how it was done and the overhang and things, and as somebody that's affected by the overhang where I sit, I still understand and I see the disabled section and I go, that it had to be done. I can't fault them for these kind of decisions, but the other parts of it aren't paying dividends, and so we're having to take money out of the bad parts essentially to fund these necessities. Whereas a well-run club could have that on the side and use the extra funds for that, and still have money to function properly. But whereas we're always seem to be robbing Peter to pay Paul almost.
Yeah, agreed, mate. And you touched on actually quite an interesting point there, the disabled works and the Copeland stand. So that's done now. Likelihood is I don't think we saw the impact of that on the recently released financials. I think that will come into play in the next set. Kevin, do you kind of worry that again might limit us, even looking a year ahead? Actually, that might have a limiting factor on what we can spend, because we're probably quite likely to make a loss this year, I think, despite what the interview said.
Yeah, I think if things stay the way they are just now, with the likes of the player trading model, performances on pitch, depending on what happens with the manager in the future, things can change pretty quickly. Though I think, although we will be due to make a loss, I think, like every single season, I think the Champions League qualification is what will make a massive difference for us in terms of what we can do and what the board are willing to run a loss at. The problem that we're in just now is that second's not even guaranteed, which it normally is. So I think that will be a concern in terms of the board. There's no doubt that, obviously, I did notice that the work's done in the Copeland stand wasn't in the financial records that was released a few weeks ago, so that they will carry into next year. I don't work in that trade, and I would have no idea exactly how much the cost is, but I'd imagine it would be probably quite some. So yeah, it's a tough one, because I think things can change in an instant. We could go and have an excellent second half of this season, and we might see the likes of Raskin, Shefty, Yilmaz, Danilo even go for like massive fees come the end of the season. Then that sort of solves all their problems. I think as things stands just now, you would look at it going, I don't really know where we go from here. And if, God forbid, we do finish third this season, then I think it would be a very tricky summer to try and navigate next year, with some real concerns. I think the problem that you would have then is that you then have some of these assets try and force a move, and because the performance levels, we'll obviously go on and talk about the boards soon on tonight's pod. But I think it's massive when they come in to make sure they get all the decisions right, whether that be they can get fresh investment from elsewhere, or the current board are able to put some extra funds into the club to try and combat the January window. So I think based on just now, but I can't see us getting any major fees for players. We might break even, might be able to reduce wage bills with some, but we're likely not going to get enough money coming in, I think, for us to go and invest. And I think if we don't improve the performances on field between now and the end of the season, I think it could be a real tricky summer next summer.
Yeah, agreed, mate. Agreed. And just lastly on the finances, probably the one thing that does stand out apart from what we've already covered, Doug, is the fact that we are still heavily reliant on director soft loans. Looks like we're roughly 20 million in debt to those directors. Now, obviously, that in of itself isn't a worry. There's various options. They can leave that as a loan. They can convert shares, equity to shares. So there's kind of options there, but long term, that isn't really sustainable. I know some of these guys have got deep pockets. There's only so much that they're going to be able to cover. And even UEFA has certain stipulations in there about shares, equity kind of conversions. Do you see a path? I mean, obviously, we had that interview from James Taylor, and he tried to paint quite a rosy red picture. Do you actually see a path that we can get away from these director loans in the kind of near to medium future? You're on mute, mate.
Is that to me?
Yeah.
I think in the short term, it's probably still going to be required while we're pushing forward. I mean, obviously we've got a fair amount to pay off still, and I mean, I think that's one of the things that I think that, you know, if you spend any more than 2 minutes on Twitter, you'll see plenty of people that are absolutely desperate to get the board that are there out. And while I do think that change in the boardroom is required eventually, you know, I'm not as quick to chase people out that have been willing to put in as much money as they have, because ultimately they've put significant amounts of money in, and have done so at significantly below market value for the return. So while yes, they're still making profit, I mean, who's investing money and not looking to make a profit? That's what an investor does. But you know, the type of people that are willing to invest and give the club a deal that is, as I say, well below market value. And also another key aspect that I think is important is all but one of our loans. I believe this is correct. If anyone can correct me if not, but I believe all but one of our loans are non-asset tied loans as well. So it's not a case of if something goes wrong, someone else suddenly owns Ibrox, someone else, because that was the case when people like Ashley were in charge. Their loans were backed by the assets so that they could potentially take those. I believe the only loan that is asset backed is the loan that Bennett gave for Edmiston House, and I can live with if we lost that, so that's fine. And to me, that's also important because, again, you know, a less blue tinted investor might not be as willing to do that as well, particularly while financial markets are still recovering. So, you know, I think these are things that we do need to think of when we're thinking about, you know, replacing the board. We don't want to just take anyone. And, you know, we've seen what's happened elsewhere. We've seen what's happened to ourselves. So, you know, I'm not quick to do that and to look in that direction, because I do think it is something that we will need for a wee while yet, while we're still, you know, building all these things and improving all these tenants and getting ourselves to that sustainable point. But long term, yeah, I think, you know, David Egger said it a number of times. These guys have surely got to be sitting there going, I'm not that really great at running a football club, am I? So maybe, you know, they need to be thinking about what they want to do longer term, and help, again, put the club on that sort of strong footing in the long term basis once they've helped sort of reassure the short term.
Yeah, for sure. And Ross, kind of swiftly slide in between the two. So we started on the finances, and I said we were going to move on to the board. I guess the first one to cover here does kind of tie into finances as well, as Matt has carefully pointed out in the chat. So it's talking about the B team. Saying it costs us more to run than 90% of the teams in the SPL now. I'm not sure the exact amount. I don't know if that's kind of over exaggerated, but I think he does raise a point here. You know, we've got a B team that in essence has got very little direction, isn't really providing a kind of stream of talent to the first team. I think you probably count on one hand the kind of youth products we've got there. And we still don't have a head of academy. So we've got no league structure for these guys. We've got nobody kind of looking at that. What can we do? Is it a cross-Atlantic league type thing that's been mooted? Is it B teams in the Highland or Lowland leagues? You know, we don't have any of that, and there's no real kind of path to it. So I guess the question for you, firstly, how important do you think a head of youth development is, or do you think we should be looking the other way and actually considering whether we retain an academy in its current guise?
Well, I believe an academy is actually a UEFA necessity. If I'm correct, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that some level of academy is a necessity. So whether we like it or not, we need to keep sticking with it. The problem with the academy, I think, is that we don't, like you say, we don't get enough out of it. But it's a bit of a catch-22 thing because we are such a high pressurized club. We don't really have the opportunity to bleed in 4 or 5 guys if you bring in young guys that are 17, 18, 19, and you want to give them 30 games a season, you can't guarantee that you're going to get, 30 wins in those games. People need to learn, and they're not being given the environment to learn properly. You said they were talking about the head of the academy. We've not had one for a while. I think it was Craig Mulholland, and then it was Seb Jacobs, and these guys have had mixed reputations. I think, I don't know them. Obviously, we don't really know much about them personally, but they talk about how we want to make good academies. They had the I think it was called the Best versus Best series at one season, where we were basically going and playing the youth teams of Bayern Munich and Monaco and Arsenal, and they decided that wasn't right. That's fine. They put them into the Highland League and they play in the SPFL Trust Trophy. They pulled them out of that as well. So what are you wanting them to do? So, because essentially all they do now is basically play friendlies. I think if I'm correct in saying they basically, and how can you convince young guys that they've got a pathway to play proper first team football when they get absolutely no exposure towards any sort of real competitive football, barring the Challenge Cup games? So, if you were a young guy and you were at Rangers and you've seen there's virtually no pathway to the first team, you wouldn't want to stay. Everybody likes to harp on about Zach Lovelace. I think Zach Lovelace is out of contract at the end of the season. I think he would be mental to want to stay because he's very, very little exposure. I know he's had a bit of a bad injury, but the only one that we've brought through with any real semi-degree of success has been Ross McCausland, and he only get brought in out of sheer necessity because of a ridiculous injury crisis. You always hear about the next wonder kid that comes through. People are talking about Finlay Curtis at the moment, who's obviously scoring goals. He seems to be scoring goals for fun. But he can score 100 goals in the B team. Doesn't mean it's going to translate to playing in the first team. But the young guys don't have the platform to go and learn properly. I think they'd be more inclined to have young guys like that go out and, if they have to go and learn how to play at Annan or Alloa or Clyde or Falkirk, let them go and do it, because you're going to learn how to play, especially in Scotland. You're going to learn how to play infinitely better than you are playing against Carlisle's B team or Brentford's B team, which is we seem to play Brentford B team every 3 weeks. So I think that I don't know. I'm obviously just been, but you get the point I'm trying to make. And again, it's just another part of the club. It's completely and utterly rudderless. It's just kind of floating and not doing anything. You need to wonder what are these young guys getting in their football education, because they're not getting anything at Rangers. We don't, and even then you could say to them, if you've got a platform, if you play well, you can get sold. Nobody goes anywhere. We don't sell anything. You look at Celtic's academy. Celtic sold Ben Doak, who was never seen for Celtic. He went to Liverpool. He was a talented player. They sold what's the boy's name? Johnson. I know he came through their academy, but he wasn't well liked. But they got $2 million from him because he was given a little bit of exposure. But he was not, when they realised he wasn't good enough, he was sold and they get money from him. When was the last time we get money for an academy player? The dodgy deal for Gilmer. Do you know what I mean? So we've barely had anything at all, and it's academy that we're pumping money into, money we don't have, and again, we're not getting anything out of it.
Yeah, agreed. And Kev, if you're looking for a head of youth at the minute, what would be the key things that you're looking for from that role?
I think at that level, I think there needs to be two separate categories. I think the first and foremost is someone that knows what the pathway is about and has like fresh ideas in terms of what it's going to take us further forward. Also, I think for me, I think like a standards perspective, just in terms of a Rangers standard perspective, like I think we've done a couple of pods around who we would like to see in certain positions, and I floated the idea of Kevin Thompson. I think someone that's got like a real good coaching background. He's worked within the youth academies at Rangers. He obviously knows what it's like to play for Rangers, although I don't think that's necessarily important to be the manager of the first team. But I think at that sort of level, I think it is definitely important. And just to sort of touch on a point that Ross had made as well, I do think that the youth setup for Rangers is a bit of a shambles at the moment, and I think a lot of that plays into what the main sort of topic is for us tonight, where we just don't have anyone at that sort of boardroom level to make these decisions. And I think I get the whole point of taking our time, get the right appointment. But that's been, what, 6-7 months now?
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous amount of time. I just feel we're so slow to make these decisions. And I think that being the main factor as to why it's in such a bad position just now. Obviously, the chopping and changing of the head of youth academy has not helped as well. Jacobs came in for a short period of time and then was away again. So I think we just need a bit of stability, the same way that we need the stability at boardroom level. And it's just two things that we lack at the moment. I think just an extra point as well on the youth side. I don't think it's solely Rangers' responsibility to improve youth football. I think I seen a stat, and I think it's only Motherwell this season that have given more than 5% of minutes to under 21 Scottish players. So I think it's not just a problem at Rangers. I think, we definitely probably overpay on some of these players. However, I think it's a problem across the board in Scotland just now. I think years ago where we scrapped the B League, I just don't know why we done that. We should have a reserve team league. I think there should be competitive football at that level. We should be able to then, at that point, be able to pick the best from the rest within there to try and promote getting young players through. So I think it's two parts. I think Rangers have got the responsibility to get the right people in place to take the club forward with a strategic plan, like you said, Dave. But then also, I think Scottish football's got a lot to answer for in terms of the standard of young Scottish talent at the moment.
That'll be what Doncaster's picking up is near $500,000 a year for, mate. Right. Let's kind of move on then. So I guess probably the two most important roles in any kind of high profile business are the chairman and the CEO. As all the guys have kind of touched on through this pod so far, both of them are currently vacant. One of them has been vacant for, what, to be blunt, is an obscene amount of time. So just kind of for anyone that's not sure, you're chairman, you're generally looking for that strategic direction. They are the ones that, put together, you'll have heard folk talking about a 5-year plan. And we've actually got a pod tomorrow dedicated solely to our Rangers Journal podders deciding that they're the chairman for a day and coming up with their own suggestions of what we could do. But the fact remains, at the minute, we don't have that kind of strategic direction from a chairman. But then equally, your CEO is more your kind of manager. They look after the day-to-day stuff. They ensure that we're working within our means, that we're kind of doing basically what we need to as a company. And I think that's something we maybe lose sometimes as fans, Doug. I think we obviously have an emotional connection to the club. We have a love for Rangers. We see it as fans. But there's actually a business there. And without that business, then the team can't be improved. The facilities can't be improved. So I guess to start with, do you think that John Bennett and now John Gilligan have a 5-year plan or any kind of long-term plan? Do you see from the decisions that have been made that that's all kind of working towards something?
Just before I touch that, I just want to make a really, really quick point about the youth thing, just because it's something that I feel really, really important, passionate about. I feel these discussions often take on a purely financial aspect. And for me, youth academies are incredibly important to keep from a community point of view, and in terms of the club standing within the community and how that can affect its relationship with its fan base and its relationship with the city as a whole. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind when the club's looking at those types of decisions. Because it's something, I think, for things like that, there's more than just financial things to take account of. But I'll leave that there. I just wanted to make that point because, as I say, it's something that always is I feel is always forgotten in those, and something I think is really important. In terms of the board, I believe there was a plan at one point. However, I don't think that there'll be anywhere near what it was. I have definite memories of discussions of a plan that were in place under the previous CEO, but where that plan is now and whether we're anywhere near any of its targets, I don't know. I know that part of the main thing that I know was kind of because they never really released it publicly. There was a 10-year plan in place. It included things like the building of Emerson House and improvements to the stadium, and it was apparently from that they released the sort of the stadium plans that they did release in terms of this year was going to be Copeland, next year was going to be Brimlin, etc. They've already said they're probably not going to be doing the Ibrox stuff next year because of what's happened this year. So, I mean, if that's the case, that's that plan already out the window in terms of meeting its goals. So I would have to suggest that there may still be the remnants of a plan, but how close they're still following that, what's still happening, I don't know. There's obviously, they won't have planned at the time, around about the time they're meant to have put it together. We were still under Gio. They've sacked 2 managers since then. I would assume that wasn't in the plan. They're obviously in this rebuild with Clermont now, which wouldn't have been part of the plan. Although that said, if they were clever, then a rebuild probably should have been within the plan, given the ages of players and things like that. So I would suggest no. And even if they do, by the time they've got the whole new CEO in and a new board, given that there's key positions to make, it would probably need to be reviewed anyway. I think the person coming in, I want that person to be coming in with their own plan, their own ideas, because I'm hoping that the CEO that's coming in is going to be someone that's really excited by this post in this position. As I say, I think I've said before, I think the only upside to where we are right now is that Rangers can go to prospective candidates and say, look, we've got a club that's hollow right now in its management structure. You can come in and put that structure in place the way you envision. You can come in and build a vision with us in this club. And obviously, part of the appointment will be getting someone that has a vision that aligns with what we want. You want someone that's going to come in and bring trophies back to the club, bring profits back to the club, and instigate all these things. So I don't think there's... The plan right now has got to just be get a new chairman, get a new CEO. Out with that, there's no point, because those 2 people are going to be key to the planning of the future. So I think that ultimately they need to be looking laser focused 6 to 12 months. I'll take that back, 6 months. These people in position, and then they will then sit down and go, right, what's the state of play? How do we plan 5 years, 10 years from this point?
Yeah, and I think if I'm being honest, Doug, one of the kind of things that you're talking there is someone coming in with a vision, right? There should be a vision through the club, and I think part of the problem and the reason that we find ourselves in this situation where it's all a bit rudderless is the fact that it's not one position, but there's a multitude of senior positions vacant at the minute. Now, to be honest, again, a quick glance at social media, you'd have seen just for the sheer amount of positions that are vacant, there's folk claiming that that's a takeover in the making. That is normally when you see this kind of clear out. Now, I get circumstances have moved on, Ross, and it doesn't appear that there's going to be any takeover. I think these guys are here for the foreseeable, but James Bisgrove left start of the summer, and we still have not replaced him. And for me personally, I'm baffled at that. I get you want to make the right appointment, but there comes a time where you just have to get on with it. And do you think that that's contributing to the kind of overall malaise around the club at the minute? The fact that we have got so many senior leadership positions open and vacant?
I think, just to touch on something you said there, it would be the most Rangers thing ever to let all these guys go thinking there's a takeover and then not have a takeover.
Yeah,
It's
fair.
just it's just us all over the
Don't
back.
go there. Don't go there.
Oh, honest to God. Yes, there's clearly there has been a lot of a real feeling of malaise around the club. I think even before these guys have left, I think the club as a whole has stagnated post 2021. I don't think that's a controversial statement to make. There's been a plethora of bad mistakes made by a number of people who have been in positions of power and influence, including we talk about James Bisgrove, the Parks, Bennett. These guys have the ability to make decisions, and a lot of the time they've not made the correct ones. We're now in a position where, like I say, we've had to bring in a guy who's essentially retired just to essentially do the job of a chairman, a CEO. We've got the director of football recruitment, who was brought in as one half of a director of football position with him and Craig Robertson, now doing both roles because the other guy's left or he's been sacked, or rumours, conjecture, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I say, we've lost the head of the academy. People had their way. We wouldn't have a manager either, So it's just absolutely ridiculous. We've got to this stage. I think the date exactly was the 31st of May. When the 31st of May, and the CEO, the guy running the place day to day, left. We've been 6 months. Some people have got their Christmas trees up, and we still don't have MD. We still don't have MD running the place. We still don't have anybody whose job it is to run that place day to day. I know we're talking about the chairman puts in the strategic plans for 5 years, but we don't have MD that's doing strategic plans for the next 5 weeks, and that's unacceptable. You have guys, investors and big businessmen who've made money all around the world. The Parks have made money here. Gibson's made money in Asia. Halstead's made money in America. They make business decisions that if they made in their own businesses, they'd be pointless. But for some reason, every decision that seems to get made with Rangers is wrong, and I think I think some of these decisions have led to people wanting to leave. I don't think Bisgrove had to be convinced to stay. I understand Saudi money is very, very tempting, but he was a divisive figure. I think if you speak to people within the upper echelons of support that knew him, I don't think it's a coincidence that Jim McAllister, the old kit man, has been back at Ibrox. He was back at Ibrox on Sunday. I don't think that's a coincidence, regardless of what anybody says. So I understand that I don't think you have to like everybody that you work with, and I don't think the board. I think there's people within the board that don't like each other, apart from the obvious King and Park one. I think there is a divide there, but we're at a stage now where there's nobody. I don't think there's enough people on the same page to be able to make competent recruitment decisions. And I know that's probably been a little bit kind of over dramatic, but like I say, we had Jim Gillespie lined up for St Mirren, and he probably looked at the place and went, "Nah, you're all right." And bearing in mind he's at St Mirren, who have just sacked 3 players in the last 2 weeks for all numbers of incidents, and he's like, "Nah, I'd rather stay at St Mirren where it's easy than run Rangers." The biggest job in the country that he could probably get would be to run Rangers day to day, and he looked at that and probably went, "Nah, you're all right." So if we can't even bring somebody in from a provincial Scottish club to do the job, how are we going to be able to attract somebody from somewhere within the bigger business world to come in and run this shambles? On top of that, you've then got he's got to answer to somebody above him. Well, there's nobody there to answer to. You've got a temporary guy who's 72 years of age that we've had to bring out of retirement, who's only there because we're very, very fortunate that he loves Rangers. If he didn't love Rangers, he wouldn't be there. I mean, John Gilligan is obviously one of those guys that's got so much respect. He's earned respect within Rangers because of the things that he's done for us in the past. But he wasn't perfect either. But he's a guy that's at that age. He has to be the chairman. Like I say, he has to be the chairman. He has to be the CEO. he has to headhunt these guys. We've apparently had recruitment agencies to hire people. No big business anywhere in the world goes 6 months with a CEO. Never mind a chairman. No big business in the world does that. And that's what I'm saying, is that these guys who run these businesses, do you think Parks of Hamilton would go 6 months without a CEO? I don't think so. Do you know what I mean? And that's the issue that I've got, is that the people that run it wouldn't make these decisions in their own business.
Absolutely, mate. And I just want to touch on the name you mentioned there. So, Kev, Ross obviously called out Jim Gillespie from St Mirren. He was rumoured to be the front kind of contender for it. Depending who you listen to, either that interest cooled or he rejected it. I think the concern for me is a CEO is ultimately, as I said earlier, the manager. They're the ones that get things done. Now, Rangers are 100 million plus business, 110 million of revenue. St Mirren, with the greatest respect, aren't. Do you think there's an argument that Jim Gillespie could grow into the role, or do you think that CEO is maybe the one position that we just need to, bite the bullet, go get the leading candidate and pay what that leading candidate is going to want to do the job?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, actually. We done a pod on the CEO position a good few weeks ago, and he was a name that got brought up, and I think a question mark that got raised was the fact that, I know, but he's only been at St Mirren with the greatest respect. How could he do it at Rangers? I definitely think he could. I think in these sort of positions, I don't think that the difference in finances of the club would hinder his ability to do the role as it stands. I think if you're a CEO, you come in with that skill set of being in that position. If anything, the higher revenue would actually make his job easier, technically, because he can go and help with investment in better players. Rangers are a more attractive club for the likes of sponsors. Ross was mentioning 32 Red earlier on. So I think if anything, that actually makes his job easier. I think if he's got the skill set to demonstrate that he can come and do it at Rangers, then yeah, I think he could. I think the problem is that I wouldn't be surprised if we were looking at the likes of Jim Gillespie or a CEO. I think with the Hearts CEO, is it Mackay? I could be wrong with the name. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we were to get a CEO from maybe a smaller club in Scotland. I think the problem with ourselves is that we might not be able to attract a higher calibre as it stands. I don't think it's a bad option to go and look at someone that's been successful at a team like St Mirren, at a team like Hearts, at a team like Motherwell or Brave decisions. I think that obviously but that ended really badly for St Mirren. However, he was, I suppose, bold enough to say, listen, I'm willing to do this, but I need people to uptake season tickets. And they end up improving their season ticket sales for that season. So I think he's got the ability to make tough decisions and be successful with their decisions. So I think he could come in and do a job. If the rumours are right, though, and he's declined us, then we obviously move on to the next target. Yeah. But yeah, I personally wouldn't have an issue getting someone else of that calibre in. I don't think that would make me nervous in any way. As long as they've got the right skill set to be a CEO, then they should be able to apply that within any business they go into.
Yeah. And Doug, I guess, what for you would be your top priority out of the three that we've identified? So, head of youth development, chairman, CEO. What kind of order would you like to see these guys come in?
Well, they've already said that the chairman's going to come first. So, personally, I would probably say the CEO isn't the most important, but I understand the logic in terms of kind of doing it in order of hierarchy. So I'm fine with it being that way. The chairman and the CEO are both more important. The head of academy is way down the list of priorities. The academy will run itself in the meantime. So, I think you want to get a chairman. I think the chairman's slightly easier for me because I think the skill set required is a little less pressing in a way. We just need someone that's going to be dedicated to the club for a decent period of time, who's going to be a trusted custodian. But also the most important thing for me is I want someone in the chairman's role who can sit back and who will let his appointed CEO run the club, and just have the board there when needed to input and to back up and whatever else. The CEO should be, he's the businessman, he's the person, as I say, that should be outlining the vision for the club and then implementing that. And they need to be empowered to go and do that and make decisions to run basically everything that's below them. If the chairman doesn't trust his CEO to do that, he shouldn't be employing him in the first place. The CEO, is where the key decisions will be made. It's where things will either go right or go wrong for me. So I think, that's the most important position in my mind, and the one that we need to get right. I do think occasionally fans can be a little bit snobbish about appointing younger or lower stature people. So many positions in the world are filled by up and coming people who, can go into higher positions and take them on really well. And ultimately, one thing that a lot of people think is important is a knowledge of Scottish football and its unique quirks. If you want someone with that skill set, they need to have been working within Scottish football. We are one of the two biggest clubs in the country. Therefore, everyone with that skill set is coming from somewhere smaller, unless they're coming from maybe an FA position or something like that. And I can't say I would be excited by someone who's running Scottish football coming to run us, because Scottish football's not running any better. So in that respect, I think, Kev said, you're going to be looking at people at smaller clubs, and okay, maybe people would rather it come from a Hearts than a St Mirren, but I think we just need to be open to someone being the potentially right person. Because, like you say, the opposite is we're going to go out and get a candidate who's got a glittering history. Well, you're going to have to pay for that, so that will require paying top dollar. So they can go either way, but I kind of think in a lot of ways it's a little bit like appointing a manager in terms of our stature in the world. We're a big club, but not in a financially big league or the financially biggest markets in terms of what we can get, kind of like, what was mentioned earlier. So there are going to be people that I think we can find that are up and coming, and maybe they've already been CEOs at clubs in Europe and things like that. But again, I think that's something that we can be doing. Look for those up and comers that have got a decent start, shown some good things, and then give them this opportunity to come a club that's a big European club that you're going to be in Europe. You've got the opportunity to do big things with, and then that could maybe be your step to getting yourself at a super club, if that's kind of their goals in terms of their businesses, or indeed a super business of whatever kind. Because again, it's a business role, so you could be looking at wider than just football as well. Although that's obviously arguably, well, not arguably, it is an important factor, football knowledge, but again, not necessarily essential for what is essentially a business position primarily. You can have other people in the club, like your Coppins, or indeed if they're going to have a director of football of some kind that can be more football orientated and you can get that knowledge from. So there is the opportunity as well to go for more business orientated people to look after what are ultimately the business facets of the club, your commercial and all that kind of stuff, and then have the football people do the football stuff.
Yep, absolutely, Doug. And I'm just going to go around everyone here, right? Final question. I just want a one-word answer. Do you think we'll have both the chairman and CEO positions filled by New Year? Kev, I'll come to you first.
No.
Okay. Doug?
Ditto.
And Ross?
It's a hat trick.
It's so four, I'm afraid. Yeah, can't see it. So what I would say, we've obviously covered the doom and gloom of the current position tonight. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you have liked what you heard, then please give the video a like. Worth tuning in tomorrow as we change the doom, we try and uplift the mood a bit, and you get the Rangers Journal plan for the 5-year plan to fix the club. In the meantime, thanks for listening, folks, and remember, every night's a Rangers Journal night.